So now we're going to turn to a different topic, a more domestic topic, different part of the world. And Palin Yu is going to talk to us about children as formational agents in the archaeological record. And I'm going to introduce her and give an abstract of her talk. She asks, is it possible to distinguish children's behavior in the archaeological record? And what roles do children play as active site formational agents, and what are the implications for archaeological investigation? And she is looking at ethnoarchaeological descriptions of playing, technological behavior, children's use of space, and their role in subsistence and social roles from neotropical forager gardeners to develop a frame of reference and predictive statements about archaeological correlates of children's behavior. We're very lucky to have Palin here today. She is a cultural specialist for the NPS Rocky Mountains Cooperative Ecosystem Study Unit, and she's an affiliate faculty with the Anthropology Department at the University of Montana, and she's worked in almost every region of the U.S. as well as Venezuela and China. So welcome today, Palin, and can you pause for just a minute while I pull up your presentation?
All right. So I'm going to sort of halfway read this paper. I don't want it to sound too dry, but we are moving sort of from an epic warrior sort of setting to something that's a little bit more of the chaos and frenzy of individual households, and those of you who have children know what I mean. I wanted to basically start off by saying that this is a topic of interest to me. We no longer have hunting and gathering peoples living in North America or in any of the areas or territories where the National Park Service stewards archaeological resources, but many of the lands which are now controlled by the United States actually did have hunting and gathering peoples extant at the time that Euro-Americans came here. So I'm thinking that this approach might actually provide some information that would be fun, helpful, useful for archaeologists and also interpretive and educational folks to think about reaching out to kids and basically also to adults who are interested in the way that kids manage their material world. So anybody who spends any amount of time with kids, and full disclosure, I don't have any of my own, but I spend a lot of time with them, can appreciate the intense nature of the way that they interact with the material world and with their chaotic but patterned use of space. If you watch kids long enough, you're going to see that they use space in pretty consistent ways. Archaeologists are becoming more and more interested in children, and to date, kids have played a lot of different roles in archaeological theory and research problem orientation. Next slide, please. Kids have been cast in a lot of different roles by archaeologists, whether they're sort of little reflectors of adult systems, as we have tended to study mortuary patterning of children's burials, whether they are little beings that are sort of disempowered, marginalized, and invisible because archaeologists just haven't really had the interest in trying to find them in the archaeological record, and more recently as more calculating decision makers who really are bound by the sideboards of fitness and optimality in a more evolutionary sense. And these are just a few ways in which archaeologists have sort of cast children in supporting roles to support various theoretical perspectives. Next slide, please. These disparate sort of approaches really do converge on some key points, though, which is that children are worthy of archaeological investigation. They can illuminate aspects of past lifeways and systems, that their behavior should be, you can see it. You can see their behavior in the archaeological record, and that children's activities are not just miniature versions of what grown-ups do, but actually are conditioned by some really interesting, unique factors. And again, I would say that these are things that might be able to feed into improved interpretation and education of archaeological sites by archaeologists and educational specialists to reach out to people who are interested in this topic. Next slide. Today I'm going to address these questions using some observations of hunting and gathering and gardener children in a neotropical setting, by which I mean New World tropics. I'm going to introduce the Pume people of Venezuela. Next slide. Technological behavior and use of space will contribute to a frame of reference about expected archaeological signatures, but rather than cast kids in a supporting role for any given theoretical position, my goal in this study was basically to let a kid be a kid and watch them as dynamic agents in the formation of the archaeological records. The observations I'm about to share with you I made in the early 1990s in south central Venezuela, in seasonal camps of the Doroana community of Pume Indians. Okay, so on this slide, we should be seeing a graphic of a map. Is that correct, Karen?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, we are.
Sure. Okay. Let's go to the next slide. The Pume live in south central Venezuela near the headwaters of the Orinoco River, and there's sort of two modes of life for these folks. They either live in sort of semi-sedentized, acculturated river communities or in more traditional mobile groups in the grasslands. During the dry season, there's basically two seasons in this place. Dry season is when basically the terrain is free of water, and this is when people can get around a lot. So this is where people do a lot of mobile work. They do a lot of long-distance trips for subsistence. They do a lot of visiting and trading. Next slide. This should show a dry season village. The Pume move every week or two during the dry season and live in small family groups right along river drainages where they can access fresh water. Next slide. Men fish in local ponds and rivers, providing the majority of food by weight during the dry season. Next slide. And women gather insect larvae and wild and introduced fruit. But their main focus during the day, during the dry season, is going out and procuring raw materials for technology, particularly weaving. Next slide. During the rainy season, floodwaters rise and the Pume move upslope. There are a lot of stabilized sand dunes in this area. The clay soil here is called plinth soil, so the water table just keeps rising during the rainy season, and you're basically wading up to your armpits trying to get from dune to dune to go visiting, so people don't do as much visiting during this period. The Pume move upslope to these larger multifamily houses during the wet season, the rainy season. Next slide. Houses are arranged near a dance plaza that's used for nighttime ceremonies, and let me tell you guys that you haven't lived until you've partied for about 5 nights in a row with the Pume. They're a lot of fun. Each house has a kitchen midden, and some of the larger sort of multi-household or common middens form at the edges of camp. Next slide. During the rainy season, women, men and women switch roles, and women supply the majority of food by weight, hundreds and hundreds of pounds of wild roots and some wet season fruit, and they also do small-scale gardening of bitter manioc. Next slide. Men do hunt during this time of year. This is a really good time to hunt, actually, because the water table is so high that terrestrial mammals and terrestrial reptiles are somewhat constricted in their movements, and so it's pretty easy to intercept wild game. And here you see a wide variety of wild animals these guys hunt. I don't have a picture of a giant anteater either, but those are hunted as well. Interestingly enough, snakes and monkeys are not on the menu, although they are everywhere. There are spiritual reasons not to eat them. Next slide. The Doroana Pume community at the time of my visit and research was made up of about 60 people, including 20 children. Pume children are usually born at about 3 or more year intervals, sometimes up to 5-year intervals. Babies are nursed all the way up until 5 years of age, and so for those of you who have taken basic anthropology classes or nutritional classes, you know that constant lactation can suppress ovulation in women, so the long-term nursing of babies often spaces births out, which is a very common phenomenon among forager women who don't want a whole bunch of toddlers when they're moving around the landscape. Children stand and walk early compared to our kids. You would be surprised at how active these little guys can be. They're encouraged to walk at very, very early ages. There's almost no crawling stage with Pume children, which is really fascinating to me. But then we're talking about living in the tropics where there are spiders and scorpions and snakes and things. So they're trying to get children to stand up, move around, and be sort of self-propelling and out of the range of dangerous ground things at a very early age. They begin to eat solid food at about 6 months, but as I mentioned, they'll nurse up until 5 years of age. One of my favorite images that I had was sitting at a dance next to a friend of mine whose 3-year-old daughter was nursing and taking turns smoking a cigarette at the same time. This is not an image we often see here in America. Next slide. So in terms of material culture and kind of how kids start interacting with tools and things like that, girls are given small baskets and they begin to learn weaving at about 3 or 4 years of age. And there's a specific palm tree called the moriche palm, which is the primary weaving material for these folks. For us archaeologists who don't work with frozen contexts or anaerobic contexts or arid contexts, we don't get a chance to fully appreciate the incredible wealth and diversity of woven technology. This, for me, as an ethnoarchaeology person, was just really exciting. We got to see a lot of baskets, mats, twine, all kinds of hammocks being woven out there, and these are organic things that normally would not preserve in the archaeological record. Little boys are given itty-bitty bows and arrows when they're about 1.5 to 2 years of age, and they run around camp shooting at chickens and dogs and each other. The interesting thing is that for boys, I saw no manufacture of projectiles or of bows until they were in early adolescence. So the boys don't start doing sort of subsistence-type technology until a little bit later in life than the little girls. Next slide. I'm just going to start talking about the work of children. Kids today, we have our kids do a lot of homework and they play a lot of soccer and they might be doing some chores. In this forager community, kids were working quite a bit. There were a lot of activities, and I'm just going to define kids' work in this case as activities that are encouraged or directed by grown-ups. Some special tasks include the tending of infants, food sharing, and cleanup. Infant tending is a real common activity for young girls. I've seen girls as young as 4 or 5 years old carrying infants around on their hips. Girls do a lot more of work in camp overall, and orphan girls do the most work of all of the children. Typical jobs around camp would include hauling fresh water, bringing in firewood, cleaning up around camp, again, sort of infant care, and food distribution, food share-outs. And because these activities are commonly performed by adults, I think that they would probably end up getting sort of swamped in the general archaeological record of these kinds of activities. But I wanted to talk a little bit about food sharing because I thought that this was fascinating, and because a lot of archaeologists have benefited by doing refits of animal bones to show sharing among hearths and other situations. So let's go to the next slide. Karen, am I still on tack here? Do I have a slide with a bunch of dots on it, some red, some white?
Yes, you're fine.
Great. Okay. Well, so imagine you guys if you're coming home one evening and you've got both arms full of groceries and you set them down on your counter, and then you take a deep breath and you take them back out and you go up and down the street and you share out all your food to your neighbors. This is what happens when this foraging group brings food home, is they immediately distribute it around camp, and this is a very common practice with foraging people. Conversely, it was kind of nice if you didn't go shopping that night. You might have a couple neighbors drop off some bananas or a can of soup for you. So there's a lot of sharing going on here. Every time that adults come in to camp, children are dispatched, and they go running over to the homes of returning foragers. The next 3 slides sort of show this process. So next slide. The children will run to each of the houses where foragers have come home with food, and they'll bring empty vessels with them, usually little bowls made out of gourds. Next slide. The children then walk carefully back home with full vessels to share out to their families. Both meat and plant foods are shared out, which is kind of unusual. We're used to hearing about foraging folks traditionally sharing out meat but not plants, but in this case, the women also shared out fruit and roots. In fact, sometimes we even saw 2 levels of share out, both of a raw food and then again after the food's been cooked. So these kids are running their little legs off doing a lot of sharing behavior. I would expect, archaeological traces, again, of sharing usually include things like refits of faunal bone, but then, there's no guarantee if you're looking at an archaeological site that share-out would have been done by children. I just thought it was really interesting because in all of the different groups of this particular, all the different communities of this particular ethnic group, it was the children who were doing the share-out if they were available. Next slide. When the houses or the dance plaza need cleaning, kids may be tasked with removing small, sharp debris to avoid foot injuries. The dance plaza, for example, people dance wildly all night in these dance plazas, and the last thing you want to do is step on a sharp fish bone. Also, because there are a lot of babies in camp, that's another reason to remove small objects. Next slide. Clean areas with unusually few items can manifest archaeologically as just basically empty places or voids, areas that you don't really see anything in. Some of you who have excavated in areas that you think were, voids around which there were other materials might have experienced a sort of a question mark in your head. What's going on with voids? I expect there is not a lot of chance to sort of separate children's cleaning activities from adult cleaning activities, but I did see that children did a lot of cleaning in Pume Camp because they're close to the ground, their eyes are good, and they can spot those small, sharp objects, and they were often tasked to do their very specific cleaning jobs. Here I've got a house, an idealized house that shows where you have concentrations of dropped items because people are sitting around the edges of these houses, which are thatched houses with no walls. All the natural light in the house is in a sort of a donut shape in the periphery of the house, and the dark central area is where people go to hang their hammocks and sleep at night. The central area is kept spotlessly clean, and the exterior areas have, Binford's drop zones are all around that, the periphery of the houses, and then for the outdoor houses and the middens, that's where you get a lot of the bigger items. Next slide. So this is a really fun little toy. These toys were really rare. This is a hunter-gatherer community. These folks are moving around very frequently, so kids don't accumulate big chests full of toys like we're used to seeing in our culture. I saw some small dolls. I saw a little whirligig that resembled sort of a bull roarer, as some of you may know what a bull roarer is like. I saw this wooden carousel, and very rarely children were able to get toys obtained through trade that were made, that were mass manufactured from either neighboring ranchers or neighboring tribes. Middens most often were sort of the best place for children to go and glean for toys. So this was a really interesting thing. I saw a lot of expedient toys being made out of things that could be removed from the middens immediately outside of the household. Again, archaeologically, I would not expect to see a whole lot of evidence of toys among foraging children. Okay, next slide. There is no formalized learning for tool making or material technology of any kind among the Pume, and I'm, like many of you, I'm used to sort of a step one, step two approach to learning things. Like, let's say I wanted to learn how to knit. I might get a book and go through the steps, or sit down with a friend or a family member and learn how to knit. Pume don't do that. Basically, you are on your own. You watch and you learn, and you have to kind of pick it up on the run. Next slide. A common activity for little girls is to remove woven items from middens. So these are discarded woven items, and carefully take them apart in order to replicate the weaving pattern and figure it out. They also did this with twilled twine. For those of you who know about twilling, that's basically two strands that are curled around into one. I never did observe little boys making tools. I observed them playing a whole bunch with different things, but I never saw them making tools. Here I show a midden, sort of generalized midden that has discarded objects, some of which are just, cruddy things like old bones and things that nobody could do anything with. But there's some that might have a little bit of usefulness or prettiness left to them, and then the pink dots are the items that would be of high interest to kids who are going into the midden looking for things that they can either play with or learn from, or both. Next slide. I would expect that the only archaeological correlate of kids doing this kind of thing would be the removal from middens of objects that have a little bit of use life or prettiness remaining, and you'd see a pretty high concentration of just junk, especially if you had a large midden and you had edges that were closer to camp where kids might be sort of searching more routinely. This was one of the most fun things for me to think about as an archaeologist, because we tend to think of middens as dead zones, as areas that really don't have much going on. But actually, I thought that it was fun to see that Pume children actually are in middens a lot, and they're removing a lot of items from middens. So heads up, archaeologists. Next slide. Unlike kids here in industrialized settings, Pume kids do not have designated play spaces. They don't have playgrounds. They don't have their own bedrooms. They don't have anything like that. Their play space is 100% integrated with adult space. But there are some differences. One thing was I noticed that kids in Pume settlements move freely across public-private interfaces. They can go into any house at any time and say, hey, I'm hungry, for example. Or, hey, I'm sick, or hey, I'm scared, and any adult will take that kid in. Like every kid I've ever known, little herds of these kids will try to find zones that are at least temporarily outside of adult notice or supervision. So they will create special spaces adjacent to camp. They will occupy empty houses or abandoned well fields, or even the dance plaza, anywhere where they can find a space that's temporarily vacated by adults and where they can do whatever they want without adults yelling at them. So I would expect that in some of these, maybe in campsites or areas with long-term occupations, you might actually see the remains of children's play activities in areas that you would not consider to be active areas in the adult sense. Next slide. I'm going to talk a bit about subsistence. Pume kids don't really contribute a lot to subsistence. I've seen some other groups where foraging kids really do contribute a lot to subsistence because there are things like shellfish or fruit that are easy for kids to procure. Hunting and gathering is pretty challenging out here. It can be dangerous. It can be arduous. So Pume kids don't really contribute a lot. I saw them foraging around the edges of camp, but it was not very common. And basically what they did was if they needed a snack, they would just go to a house and they would ask, including my house. Foraging kids in Africa and Australia, again, with more ready access to easily procured wild foods, have been observed targeting really low-rank resources for short trips. And so studies of these children, ethno-archaeological studies of these children would expect a lot of the remains of these low-ranked nearby resources in camp middens. But here in the Pume case, I don't think we'd be able to see that. Next slide. In societies like among the Pume where there aren't a lot of kids because of the long space between births, again, there's no specially designated spaces for children, and work and play activities are just intertwined almost completely without any seams at all. They would be very difficult to discern from adult behaviors and activities in the archaeological record. So is it impossible to investigate children of the past, and particularly would it be impossible to sort them out from the archaeological remains of small, mobile foraging societies? I would say not necessarily. There were a few really interesting implications I was able to get out of these observations of Pume children that I think are provocative and worth following up on. One of them is the central roles of children in sharing and redistribution activities, the cleanup of small and particularly sharp debris in camp and households, creating clean voids, the removal and modification of items from middens for playing and for learning, and the use of abandoned or temporarily empty adult spaces as high-value play areas. Next slide. So I would like to say that children are really interesting little critters. They do interact with their material world all the time. I think the activities I mentioned before are really germane to a variety of societies at different scales, going all the way up to agricultural or even industrialized settings. I mean, as a mental exercise, I like to picture a long-term camp with no children at all, if you can try to imagine that. A camp in which sharing and cleanup probably would still occur, but middens might end up containing a higher number of tools and other sort of nice objects that had some use life remaining. And abandoned spaces might become truly dead or completely devoid of any activity. So in conclusion, I think that it would be good for archaeologists to be mindful of children's contributions to the archaeological record. You'll notice I didn't bring up anything about nappable stone here because the Pume do not have nappable stone, but I'm pretty sure that kids would be using up a lot of nappable stone trying to make things such as projectile points or scrapers. For any of you who have experimented in flint knapping, it's not easy, and I'm sure that kids would make lots and lots of mistakes, and we would find those in the archaeological record. We need to remember, too, that children's goals are actually qualitatively different from adults due to their unique physiologies, their roles in the community and in socioeconomic roles, and also basically what their goals are. I mean, kids are not motivated by the same things that adults are, as we know. They're motivated, for example, there's no motivation in terms of getting mates or keeping them. Little kids are just running around. They're keeping themselves alive. They're playing. They're learning like crazy, and they're trying to get as much food as they can get. So next slide is basically my thank you slide, and I know this has been sort of a long day for everybody, but I'd be happy to take questions.
Hey, Lynn, thanks very much for that. What is the time, or what is the what are the ages of the children that you're talking about? I'm really interested in when young boys and girls begin to get incorporated into the subsistence regimes.
I would say that boys come in a little bit later because hunting trips involve so much travel. I've seen men go on 25-mile hunting trips in one day, also because projectile technology is a little harder to make. So boys were probably going out on hunting trips with their fathers, short forays, probably around the age of 9 or 10, and then kind of getting their hunting muscles really going around, I'd say, 14. Many of them are amazing marksmen with their bows and arrows. Little boys are doing target shooting constantly. But in terms of procuring things, it's later in life for boys. Little girls are going out and gathering with their mothers probably around 4 or 5 years old on short distance trips. The majority of sort of the play and cleaning activities and sharing activities that I saw would have been for kids of both ages, probably starting at about 3 to 4, and then they move into adult roles really at about 14 to 15.
Oh, okay. Is that the age at which they begin setting up their own households?
Yeah, it's really kind of fun to see. Boys that young rarely. I would say boys probably don't start setting up households until they are in the 18 to 20-year-old range. But girls I've seen get married as young as 14 to boys, who would maybe be in the 18-year-old range. And a lot of those younger men are actually snatched up by women in their 50s, which is a whole other story. But we saw a lot of these sort of December-May marriages, too, with much older women and very, very young boys.
Oh, interesting.
A lot of my girlfriends have thought so, too.
So, Peggy-Lynn, what is the life expectancy of children in the sense, how many children, make it to adulthood?
I don't have exact demographic numbers for that. We do have census data, but they're kind of out of date. I'll go with what I was able to observe during my 2 years there. Excuse me. I think that the infant mortality rate is probably somewhere around 20%, and I think that this would have been a lot lower in the past, but these folks are actually under a fair bit of pressure from nearby ranching communities, which are essentially cutting off their access to areas that they normally would have been able to use. So they're having a lot of constraints on mobility, and during wet season is when we see those infant mortality rates rise up.
Thanks.
Are there any more questions for Pei-Lin? Well, thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll see you all next week when our Cotter Award winners talk about their research.
Super. Thanks for the invite.
Thanks a lot.